right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sacha Connor, and I have such a treat for you today. We have some amazing leaders here from large enterprises that are going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of trying to scale practices at distributed, remote, and hybrid organizations. So that's why we called this Roses and Thorns, to get into the how of how to connect, how to collaborate, how to make decisions, how to create accountability. And because we want this to be really tactical, we are going to ask you to make some commitments. You're going to make a commitment to at least one new thing that you're going to try coming out of today's session. So you're going to see a Slido that's going to come up at some point, and you're going to put your commitments into that Slido. But before I get to the panelists, I first want to get a poll of the audience here. So how many of you are working at a company that has over 100 employees? Raise your hand. All right, hold your hand up. How about over 500 employees? All right, hands are dropping. Okay. Yes, you all qualify too. How about over 1,000 employees? All right, 2,000 employees. 5,000 employees. Okay, all right, we've got some enterprise people here. So we have on our stage representing some 7,000 person employee companies and 50,000 employee companies as well. So now we're going to turn it over to the panelists here to introduce themselves. I'm going to have each of them talk about their role and a little bit about their company and the flexible work policy at their strategy at their company. So let's start with Lauren.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren DeYoung with AllState. We are 55,000 employees globally, so I'm representing one of the larger companies. I've been with AllState for 14 years in a variety of different roles: marketing, sales, claims, customer experience, but now have the opportunity to be our workplace futurist, which is a newly created role over the past 2 years focused on all things how and where we work. So I'm really that glue and the bridge between our HR team, our real estate team, and our technology team to continue to advance how we work. We are in someone said it earlier, the remote, hybrid, the terms, I don't love any of them anymore because I think they've come to mean different things to different people. So we describe our workplace as flexible, and what that looks like is different for different departments and different teams. But at the core of what we value is the benefit and the beauty of what virtual work can do, paired with really meaningful connections in person. So that's a bit about AllState.
And since this is Roses and Thorns, so what is a rose or a thorn so far for you for the conference?
A rose of being in Austin so far has been that JC May on my team and I visited what we call a flex pod, or an on-demand co-working space that we offer employees. So got to meet up with some local AllStaters yesterday. I think just hearing all the awesome synergies and things that we're seeing, things I'm learning here. And the thorn, I think you might have put this in our prep, but it is true. The humidity in Austin is the thorn for me.
All right, let's move on to Karrah.
All right, can y'all hear me? All right, if I drop, someone just give me a sign. Yeah, thank you. I'm Karrah. I'm a employee experience program manager at Airbnb. Airbnb is a platform for stays and experiences, and we're all about using the internet to actually get out into the world. And that has informed our approach to flexible work. So our policy is called Live and Work Anywhere. And if you heard Raj speak earlier this morning, I think he really captured that spirit of work from anywhere, right? You're home. We have offices in 20 different places. People work from co-working spaces. And the idea is our flexible work model is meant to serve our priorities. We're all about collaboration and getting innovation up through the organization as fast as possible. And we know that flexibility allows our top people, our employees who we really trust, to pick the way that works best for them to get stuff done. So we have gatherings. That's really important for us to have those touch points. And we trust folks to do the work they need to do otherwise.
So what's been your rose or thorn so far?
So this is my first running remote conference, and I know there are a lot of veterans. People have been super friendly, and I am like blown away by the speakers. Like dropping in here and just being surrounded by people who have thought incredibly deeply about this topic for a very long time and have different perspectives is like so interesting. It's such brain food. So that's been a real rose for me.
All right, I'm Darren.
Hey y'all, I'm Darren, Senior Advisor at Zillow in the Cloud HQ team. We are about 7,000 people, mostly in the US, but a few folks scattered about internationally. Zillow has an interesting story. They were not remote and then decided to become remote during the pandemic. And one thing that I'm really proud of is they committed to it. They branded it. Cloud HQ is not a work from home policy. It's an actually designed strategy of how we collaborate and how we spend time together. And so we're going to get into some of the tactical elements of that throughout the conversation. Rose and a thorn. It's been so good to meet and see so many of these wonderful people in the remote community. I missed coming last year, so it's good to see a lot of you. A thorn, look, I'm an assistant coach for my son's baseball team, and I'm missing the game tonight, and it's team photo night. So we might have to just Photoshop me in. But it just goes to show I love all y'all.
AI.
So, yeah.
AI will do it, right?
And, hey,
Throw
look,
it
maybe
into
they'll get the win.
ChatGPT and add yourself right in.
And you're saying you branded, so Cloud HQ.
Cloud HQ, yeah.
You use the word flexible, I heard. And then is it still work from anywhere? Is that how you talk about it, Airbnb?
Live and work anywhere.
Work anywhere. And I'm Sacha Connor, so I'm the CEO of Virtual Work Insider. For the past 6 years, we've been teaching teams the skills to work in hybrid, remote, and distributed teams. And prior to that, I spent 14 years at the Clorox company, 8 of which I was this weird remote work experiment for them when I went remote back in 2010 and had to lead my teams from 3,000 miles and 3 time zones away. So a lot of what we're talking about today resonates from my past job and the work that we do with our clients now. All right, we are going to jump into connection and trust. So we know that building that trust and that connection doesn't happen just automatically. We have to think about it really intentionally. With the work that I see with the enterprise teams that we work with, I see a lot, especially cross-functional teams, that start out very transactional. It's very easy to be transactional, especially when you haven't met your teammates in person ever. And so you have to take that intentional approach to humanizing each other. So let's start with Karrah. Let's talk about how you build that connection and that trust within Airbnb.
Yeah, totally. So Airbnb is a design-led company. Our CEO is a designer. Our head of people is a designer. We design everything. We design slide decks. We design processes. And we think of live and work anywhere in our approach to flexible work as a product that we have to continue to refine and iterate. And when we announced our policy, what we said is take the flexibility, and then we'll get together to have the in-person connection because that's super important. We know that work and collaboration move at the speed of trust. So that was all well and good. We did a survey. We found out from our employees, yes, love the flexibility, works for my life. I am not connected. This feels bad. And so we let that inform our sort of revised approach to gathering. And that's what we call it, kind of big G gathering. And because we work on a biannual launch process, we actually let the product roadmap drive the gathering cadence. We started as with an invitation to folks once a month to come together and work cross-functionally. And what we've already seen there is an increase in trust and sense of belonging. And we really think of that as the lubricant that allows people to go back to a distributed environment and get stuff done virtually or asynchronously.
And talk a little bit more about who are the groups that are gathering. Is it everybody all at once, or is it functional teams? How do you decide who comes together?
Yeah, great question. And I would say this is still very much a work in progress, and it's something that's evolving. We start with, again, what we said is, if you need to get together, right, if there's work that you're doing, it's really hard to know what 7,000 people are working on, right? But we trust you all. If you're at a place in the process of your workflow that it makes sense to get together in person, come in, do that. And specifically, because we're working on this biannual launch cadence, the leaders working on launches, so like our E-team is in person for that week. Many of their direct reports come in during that time, and then the teams that are working on launches will be all co-located together, and they can have a really big push on the launch.
Great. So, Darren, last year, I know you weren't here, but we had Zillow leaders who came and talked about the Z retreats. So tell us a little bit about how that's evolved, what that is, and let the audience know what a Z retreat is, and then how you think about trust overall within the organization.
Yeah, so Z Retreat, everything at Zillow has a Z in front of it. So that's our intentional offsite strategy. And by the way, I will say that every great distributed team I've ever seen has a really great in-person strategy. A lot of the times this gets left to the wayside of like, let's go remote, just cut everything else. But look, we're humans, we're social, communal beings. There is value in getting together. And I think the evolution of the Z Retreat has been we've added more intentionality to it. And we've tried to be more formal about the work that happens and less formal about the bonding that happens. And what I mean by that is if you're going to ask a team to get together, fly all over the world or all over the country to get together for an offsite, look at what you're taking them away from family, from routines, et cetera. It needs to be worth their time. So we're getting really specific on what is the work that's going to happen, programming the work so that people show up knowing what the agenda is, they know what the outcome should be, so they're energized before they even get there. But on the other side of this, if you over-program the bonding, people feel like this is forced fun. So what we've seen is that if you just create more margin for people to just have coffee together more organically, it can actually build a lot of that human trust that's very difficult to reproduce or replicate over Zoom. So for any leaders out there trying to wrap their heads around offsites, get more formal with the work side of it and less formal with the bonding side of it.
So I know at Atlassian, we heard a group of us were with some Atlassians yesterday and talking about how their workplace experience team actually helps them to design those agendas so that those agendas aren't jam-packed. And often they'll say to the person who's the owner of the agenda, like, cut out 50% of what you've got there. So how do you handle that with the teams that are having the Z retreats?
Yeah, same. We have curators and programmers that can help teams that have never done this before to be more thoughtful about what the agenda should be. Our teams also have splash pages, so when you go to RSVP, if you're going to attend one, the agenda is already there, actually pretty similar to a conference like this. So if you're running offsites, you can learn a lot from how conferences are ran, and that's something that's familiar to people, so it's not a new element that they have to learn. I will say, though, on the Thorns side of it, we've done a great job using the Z Retreats to build trust in terms of human to human. But I think the next frontier of this is how do we build trust with our tools, our systems, our documentation? How do you know that if you go and find something in a document repository that it's actually up to date, that it's actually being enforced, that it's actually being used? That is the next great challenge. Like once you have established this infrastructure that allows the people to trust one another, the next layer of that is building great tools and systems so that they can trust the information that they tap into.
That's a really interesting reframe, right? We were talking about trust in terms of that human-to-human piece, but there's now the trust with the technology and the information. Is the information up to date?
Right, like you can't trust the photo of me AI Photoshop.
The baseball team
yeah,
photo.
Like I was not there. Yeah.
All right, and Lauren, with AllState, so we know that you've shared publicly that at AllState, 90% of employees feel really connected to their direct teams, but only 70% feel connected to their teams outside of the direct teams. So how are you building such a strong connection within those direct teams? And then what are you going to do to get that 70% number up a little bit?
Yeah, great question. And very similar to the Airbnb experience, employee surveys, every survey, all the free-form comments are, we love flexibility, do not take it away. But we're struggling to connect, and there are some things we want to get better at. So on two things that I'll share that we've done, we know our leaders are a really critical role to enabling that team connection and the cross-team connection. So we're in our third year of what we call the connection investment, and it is money that we have given to our mid-level leaders, some of who have travel budgets, but many who are not given a budget. And we said, this is money for you to use however best drives connectivity across your team. We had examples, some loose guidelines, but we did not micromanage how that money was spent. And it was incredible to see over the past 3 years. It took us a full year to just get people to spend the money. They were like, I don't believe it. You know, it's an expense year. It's always an expense year. And of course, we want to be critical about where we're spending our money. And at AllState, our strategy is to be the lowest cost protection provider. So it was a little counterintuitive for folks, but we reframed it that this is an investment. It's an investment in your team, and we expect a return, whether that's personal development, teams hitting their goals faster. And so that's been a really critical enabler to unlock those mid-level leaders to get creative. For some who would just plan the strategy session and have no free time, a dinner, now they feel like, okay, I have some budget. We've seen teams get creative with virtual events when they can't come together in person. So really love the flexibility that that's provided. And then on the cross-team collaboration, we don't have the full unlock there. We've done a lot, and it's slightly ticking up, but we're still experimenting. And one of the things that we've piloted, and many of you have probably heard the same, is that water cooler. How do I just meet random people? And we had a pilot. We call it Coffee Connections. It's a virtual matching platform to just meet people based on interest or just a random new person in your network. That we saw the people who went through it increased feeling connected beyond their immediate team by 13 percentage points. So like huge. We just last week, I think, scaled that and invited 40,000 employees to participate. So that's something we're hoping, regardless of geographically where you sit, what department you're in, is a way, if you're interested in meeting new people, that you can.
So one of the big thorns that I hear a lot when I work with teams is we don't have T&E budget, right? You're trying to get people to spend your T&E budget. So for those people, we have to figure out, how do we help them create that humanization, that connection? And I know all of your companies have a strategy of that local connection piece. So let's have Lauren talk about those flex pods that you have.
Yeah, so I mentioned I was at what we call a flex pod yesterday. It's really just a co-working space. We work with Liquid Space, which is a network of co-working locations, and we've opened that up in 25 cities across the US. About 10,000 employees were invited to participate, and we said, here's access, let us know how you use it. And we've seen a couple of different use cases. JC, again, on my team who's here, has stood up city hosts. So folks local who are planning events, inviting people in for all hands calls. It's a good opportunity to get together. So there's some centralized event planning. We've seen some people who just need to get out of the house and work somewhere else that notice a coworker is going to be at a co-working space, and so they pop in. So there's that one-off. And then teams have used it to gather. I work with a woman in Atlanta who actually has many of her team members there, but it's so spread out, someone always has a bad commute. And so what they do is they bounce around the city when they get together. So they kind of trade off who has the longer commute, but they like to see different locations. So that's helping us both for teams, but also for just like cross AllState networking, bring people together where we don't have a physical space, but we still really value, and employees have asked for that local connection.
And Karrah, anything to add on that with how your local teams get together?
Maybe the thing that I would add is, or emphasize, is thinking about that strategy as very dynamic, right? And so not over-engineering to the point that you have to stand up a program that is enduring, but letting sort of organic grassroots stuff take hold. And so we just had a leader who hosted kind of an impromptu book club by posting on Slack and telling everybody to expense, a $25 book, and then hosted a series of conversations that just sort of broke people out of the typical, day-to-day of folks who they work with. So you're seeing different people on Zoom calls. We also lean on our regional hub, so something similar. And I would say we're trying to push our leaders more and more to go to regions, again, to kind of bring a little bit of energy and a little bit of excitement and reinforce this idea that you don't have to be in person, or you don't have to be, our HQ is called 888, you don't have to be in the Bay Area in order to get together and benefit.
And to change the topic a little bit, we're still talking about getting together in person, but let's think about virtually on a day-to-day basis, how are we going to build that connection, that trust? And so I know at Zillow, you've talked to me about this principle of connect before content. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so for the note takers, I'm going to give you 3 things that you can write down. They're all free or close to free. The first is if you're running a recurring meeting, go to the agenda doc and at the top of it write connect before content. It gives your team permission to talk about something other than work before you just dive right into work. I know that sounds small, but it gives permission to the team, like, hey, what's the icebreaker going to be? We have to do this. It opens up the conversation. The second one is a tool called Luna Park. Phenomenal platform. You can actually host a live game show for your virtual team. They actually have live hosts in studios in New York. It's like you're on a game show. It's wonderful. Luna Park. And the last one was an idea that I actually came up with several years ago at GitLab that I have shared with as many people as possible who are looking for an alternative to a Zoom happy hour. And it's called a community impact outing. So if you've already committed the sunk cost to a Zoom happy hour, instead of doing that and forcing everyone into a Zoom room to talk about the weather, empower those people to take that same hour, it can be any hour in their week, go out in their local community and do something meaningful to them. Now, you might want to ask them to wear company swag, maybe take a selfie of themselves if you want a little branding going on, but then have them share those stories and pictures back on the next team stand-up or all hands. You can find that people are interested in a great variety of things, but you may also find that someone is interested in something that you would actually spend time on. So that costs no additional money. You just got to deploy your people into their local communities. And what I've found is that the more distributed your team is, the richer that this is, because those local communities, insights, like, wow, these people live in a great array of places. So those are the 3 that you can implement tomorrow.
Yes, those all sound like good things to maybe make a commitment about.
Oh,
I know,
well played.
Right?
Well played.
Gave you some action items to maybe commit to. So at the end of the session, we're going to show your word cloud of the commitments that you made. And back to your, connect before content. I would imagine then, that sparks some conversation at the next meeting about what was the community outing that you did. Or I'm sure that many of you are already doing those read me's or about me's for your individual employees, but you need to start actually using them. So use them to create the icebreakers at the beginning of the meeting or the warm-up question. Like, make them living documents that you're actually reconnecting with when you're with your team members. All right. The other reminder for you all, we want to take questions from you in a little bit, so you have to go into the app to add your questions, so don't forget to do that. All right, let's move now into communication and collaboration. So we know that we need to still move at speed and with clarity, but it can be hard to do, and we're in different locations and different time zones, and we have way too many communication tools. And I know that the word asynchronous communication is probably pretty familiar to most of you, but as I'm working with the client teams I work with, I still have to start there with it describing what does that word even mean and how is it different than synchronous communication. And having worked at a 100-year-old company that was highly synchronous, I know it is very hard to change that behavior. So we're gonna start with Lauren because she works at a 93-year-old company, right? And can you tell us a little bit about how you have been working to change some behavior to have a better balance of synchronous and asynchronous communication, get away from those back-to-back meetings?
Yes, and I would say this is actually a thorn for us. We have not scaled this, and I think at AllState and at a company of our size, that's a theme. We have a ton of pockets of great ways of working, teams that get it, like bright spots, and when we go to scale, it just halts. And so some of what we are focused on and can control is the fact that we have collaboration tools that our employees don't even know about, and too many in some cases. So we've really taken inventory and in some ways paused bringing in new tools, even though they're great and they're shiny, but we're really trying to look at what do we have, how do we best communicate that, and then how do we slowly start to embed those norms and share the stories of the teams that are getting it. It's definitely a journey, and I'd say what we've learned is the teams who are truly global, we have about 70% of our employees in the US, but a large group in India, Northern Ireland, Mexico. But specifically India and Northern Ireland, those teams are forced to work more async. So I think we're learning a lot from those groups. And the more we rotate people through and have more global teams, that's helping us learn and change that muscle because you have to. It's definitely harder with some of the US-based teams. So I look forward to what you all are doing that I can take back, because this is a thorn.
Well, that's why we're going to move to Darren next, because I think he has a great perspective, having worked at GitLab, remote from the beginning, very async, to now Zillow, trying to transition into Cloud HQ. So what advice can you offer to Lauren and to others?
Yeah, you really need to take a stand on it. I think one of the things that GitLab did really well is we wove a bias for async into our operating principles and actually tied it to our values. And so if you can actually get at the heart of company values, you start to change what people value, that can then change the behaviors. This is one of the hardest shifts to make. One of the documents that we put out during that era was the various stages of remote. And asynchronous is at the last stage. So very few organizations are all the way there. But there are steps that you can take to get there. One is just being clear on this is what we expect. So at a team level, you could say we want to have a bias for async. So let's try this first in a more inclusive way before we jump to a meeting. One other thing that we are in the early stages of teasing out is a pilot around labeling meetings. There's this awesome framework from Workplaceless called the Placeless Taxonomy. It's a triangle, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it breaks down what are the things that are most difficult to achieve async and least difficult to achieve async. And what we're thinking about doing is mapping those categories to labels in meetings. And so when you go to schedule a meeting, if you have to label it, then you can use technology to say, wait, where does that fit in this taxonomy? So even someone who is not doing this work day to day could be exposed to this, like, oh, that's their aha moment of, I was going to schedule a meeting for this, but now actually technology has helped me realize that there's a different way to do this. There's a better way to do this. So even something as simple as categorizing or labeling meetings can add just enough friction that you think twice about it, and sometimes that's all you need to start the movement.
Have you found a way to scale that within Zillow? So like, for example, like I don't even think Outlook has the ability to do this, or if you're using Google Meets, to like actually have a drop down where you're picking from one of those different meeting types.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I think you'll find this, at this conference, we're generally a few years ahead of technology catching up. My guess is if you revisit this conversation in 2 to 3 years, all of the major platforms will offer this. Just like speedy meetings used to be something that you had to manually change, and now it's just a drop-down feature in Google. So technology isn't quite there yet. You have to go through quite a bit of laborious back-end engineering work to make it happen in the here and now. So it depends on how much you care about it. If you want it to happen at scale, and you have a big enough engineering team, you can actually make it happen. Or you can be patient, and the big platforms will probably catch up.
And as we're talking about this collaboration, communication, time zones is a topic that comes up a lot in terms of how do you keep the communication collaboration going across multiple time zones. So at Airbnb, how are you addressing that?
I feel like this might be a little spicy at this conference. Airbnb we're a pretty synchronous culture. I gotta say it. I gotta put it out there. We're a pretty synchronous culture, and it's not clear to me that we think that's a bad thing. Like, I think we have a lot of perspective around this idea that types of collaboration and design are better done in a synchronous fashion. And one way that plays out in the time zone conversation is we have a bias toward Pacific time. That's not to say that you have to be available 9 to 5 Pacific time all the time, but that's kind of your best chance of catching the most number of people. So that is sort of where our collaboration zone fits in. Maybe something that I'll add around the making space for better collaboration, higher quality collaboration, getting out of the back-to-back meeting trap is creating more space and time for deep work. And that's sort of the other side of the design process, right? You need to be able to collaborate with people, but you also need to be able to go really deeply in your craft. And so we're encouraging more functions to create and permission time for their employees and their teams to find that space. The friction, the thorn, is What do you do when the technology team has their, deep work or focus time in the afternoon, and the HR or the G&A functions have their focus time in the mornings? Who gives, and how do you sort of do that compromise in an equitable fashion? Do you do it all the time? Do you set it once and forget it? So we're very much in the weeds of that.
Well, that's actually a great segue to you, because I know that at Zillow you've been trying core hours. Can you talk about what you've learned? What's a rose from that, and maybe what's a thorn from the core hours?
Yeah, so the context would be when Zillow shifted to fully remote from fully in office, we had to put a few principles or fundamentals in place and then just iterate on them. So I think core collaborating hours was a great first iteration, and several companies have done this as a way to try to create this window of time similar to what Karrah was mentioning, where you could count on people to be together to collaborate. But what's interesting is over time, you start to wonder, is that actually reinforcing the behaviors that we want? And it sounds like for Airbnb, that kind of is. Like, it goes back to my earlier point on commit and document who it is you want to be. And if you want to be async, weave it into the values. If you want to be more synchronous and you value that, weave that into the values so that nobody is surprised. I think what we're seeing now is that this may work better on a team-by-team level. So what we've leaned really heavily into in this year is for every team to have a team agreement. Team agreements are not new, but scaling them is new. And it's this kind of thing that if you know every team has a team agreement, even if you're not on that team, you start to become conditioned to ask, what is your team agreement about core collaborating hours? How do you feel about it? And although there may not be a perfect solution, conversation and communication certainly beats ambiguity. So we're starting there and trying to iron out team agreements in as many places as possible to get those conversations going.
So I love team agreements. So a lot of the work that I do with the teams that we work with is helping them develop their team agreements, because we hear time and time again, oh, we put a PDF of how to create a team agreement in our Dropbox and our SharePoint, and nobody has gone there, and nobody has used it. And what we find also is that at that cross-functional team level, they tend to be some more junior leaders, and they need a little bit of more of a hands-on coaching approach to teach them how to do that and how to come together. And so I have definitely seen firsthand with teams that we worked with that getting really clear on those communication norms is super helpful. What tools to use for which type of communication, and by going through that process with them, if we do the steps of designing their time together, we can start talking about asynchronous communication and say, okay, we're looking at your calendar of all the meetings that you have. Which ones can we remove and replace with some sort of asynchronous communication, whether that's a dashboard or using Microsoft Teams or Slack instead? And the other great outcome of this, it goes back to what the panel was talking about earlier about connection, is that what I didn't expect was that coming out of the process to create these team working agreements, the teams feel more connected. They know each other better, they understand each other better, and it's a great outcome of that process.
One other point that I'll give you on that, back in my GitLab days, we ran this survey on belonging, and what we found, it was right on the heels of a pilot around bringing more work into one single shared platform. And the belonging scores went way up. And it was like, well, what's happening here? Most of the time when you think about belonging, you think like happy hours or bonding or retreats or offsites. But what we found is that if you make work more transparent, easier for people to see what other teams are working on, team agreements, easier to understand or have conversations about what other teams are working on, you feel like you belong. You feel less isolated, less of an outsider. So even though you're not in that, the company put some systems in place to make it easier for you to get a feel for what else was going on. Turns out, as a human will report, that feels a lot like belonging.
There's a lot of data actually about the connection between understanding what's expected of you and engagement. So I think there's a piece of that too, because these team working agreements are expectations. You're setting expectations of how to behave within the team that you're working within.
Can I butt in on team agreements? And just to emphasize this point about expectations, like I mentioned, I'm a program manager. A lot of my work is getting the right minds into the room. And it is so humanizing to be able to say, like, hey, Darren, I know 6 p.m. doesn't work for you. I know I'm cutting into bedtime. I would really appreciate, like, can you show up? Can you make an exception? And I think to your point of, it's not just about setting agreements and never violating them. It is about humanizing each other, and there's no amount of process or structure, I think, that should ever really take the place of those very human kind of connections and negotiations as a team.
All right, so don't forget to go into your app and put any questions that you have, because we have one more section of content, and then we're going to get to some questions, and then make your commitments, please, of one new action you're going to take coming out of today. All right, now we're going to get into accountability and decision making. So we see in the headlines every day about some sort of return to office announcement or mandate, and oftentimes we see it connected to making sure that we're holding people accountable to their performance objectives and making decisions fast and speed of innovation and things like that. So every company up here has leaned into flexibility and distributed work. So you've had to adapt and still be accountable and still make decisions. So let's talk a little bit about how do you hold people and teams still accountable to their performance objectives. So let's start with Karrah.
Yeah, fantastic. So at Airbnb, we operate on one company roadmap, which is to say we have 7,000 people rowing in the same direction. And functionally, that means we have 2 product releases a year. So these are like big championship game moments, right, that everybody is sort of like moving in an orchestrated fashion toward. And that helps with clarity, right? We get to see the interconnected goals that our functional leaders subsequently make and understand, okay, I lead like some G&A functions, you lead some technology functions, you're in global operations. Let's have that conversation about how all of our work intersects, and also, hey, we're going to miss that deadline. You might need to update your goals accordingly. And then I would say, particularly with the release cadence, we have these intermittent sort of checkpoints and deadlines to get aligned, and that creates a lot of urgency around execution. We're obsessed with design, we're obsessed with urgency, we love to fabricate a very fast tempo, and that works for us, and that's part of why the synchronous work comes into play, where that context can be shared very quickly. What I'll say is we have a style of working where we do these CEO workshops, which is to say that various leaders, folks who are working on the product or whatever the initiative or the program is, are in the room together with Brian Chesky, and he's making decisions, right? He is in the weeds of the work. And then you, as a part of the team, not only understand the decision, but what did he mean? What's underneath and driving that? And you can go away and iterate very, very quickly.
So at Zillow, how are you thinking about this with accountability in terms of those performance objectives, team, personal performance objectives?
Yeah, I'd say it gets as simple as 3 words: write it down. All of us up here are big proponents of documentation, but it's simple, not easy. It's simple to say, write it down, make the implicit explicit. That's how you hold each other accountable. You create a baseline, but more specifically, create systems that help you do this, whether that's a goal-setting system that everyone uses. By the way, what the theme you'll pick up on is single source of truth. There's one company roadmap. There's one way to do company goals. Zillow has one annual operating plan where it's this massive company-wide effort, but everybody is aware of it. Everybody can have access to the eventual documentation of that. And of course, there are some offshoots throughout the year, but as much effort as you can put into breaking down silos, bringing things together, and having that single source of truth mindset, the easier it is to keep people galvanized and rallied around one mission and rowing in one direction.
When we were prepping, you mentioned something about Glean.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, Glean is a recently implemented tool, and it has access to a variety of different documentation repositories. And the wonderful thing about Glean is, so long as the information is open and accessible, you can essentially Google or search the entire breadth of the company's knowledge base, and you might not find the right answer right away, but it will put you on the trail. So maybe you'll find a document and you can see who created it, and that way you're like on the trail of the right team. This sets up a system where instead of pinging a person or filing a ticket, it creates this behavior of self-serve. I'm going to go seek the answer myself first because I know I have access to a wide array of information, and then if it's not a perfect fit, I can take additional steps from there. But even just changing that front-end behavior, instead of pinging a person, ping a system, is massively helpful when you have people distributed all over the world.
So that helps from an asynchronous self-serve communication perspective, but is also helpful to understand what other goals are within the organization? Is that something that would help you search for to make goals transparent?
It helps you be more curious. And so if you know that you have access to Glean, you could say, I wonder what the marketing team is working on this quarter, even if that's just a personal curiosity. And you can go search Glean, find what marketing decks are available, and you can just start nerding out on that. And look, maybe you're in the design team or the legal function and you say, actually, I have an opinion on that, or I have something that I could add. Well, now that that transparency has enabled you to interface with it, you're then able to take the steps to do it. Otherwise, you would be totally in the dark unless you join a marketing QBR or a marketing meeting. And so that's just one example of make information more accessible, make it searchable, make it findable, and then put the right systems in place that will help increase this culture of curiosity. And you want more people talking with each other, especially in a distributed team. That's going to increase belonging and decrease that feeling of isolation and being in a silo.
So when it comes to decision making and accountability within a company that is over 50,000 employees, how do you manage that?
So we're doing a lot of what was described, goal alignment, OKR framework across the organization. But I'll focus in on some work we recently launched with our leadership team and then how we communicated that to all employees. When it comes to how we work and distributed work and flexible work and what that means, I've mentioned a couple of times, people love it. At AllState, we're really proud of what we're doing. But last year, when I would ask people what our strategy was, what we were doing, I would get different answers. And most of them were good, but they were still different. So we took a step back and said, before we dive into distributed work and how we work, we need to go back to why. And you mentioned at Airbnb, you anchor to your purpose. At AllState, we have our shared purpose. That includes our values, why we're here, how we show up for our customers, our communities, our stakeholders, each other. And so we took a pass at that and we simplified it a bit. And then we looked at our employee value proposition, which hadn't been updated since we evolved how we work. And so we evolved and simplified our employee value proposition, of which individuality and a winning team is a key component. And so we talk about that balance of where our individual needs come together with the business needs, and how at the end of the day, AllState is a place, if you want to be on a winning team, that's AllState. So re-looked at the employee value proposition, and then we dove into distributed work, how we're working, and we clarified for the top 900 leaders at AllState, that's our director and VP and above population, and said, this is what we expect you to drive as a leader at AllState. Basic things, but operational excellence, team performance with your immediate team and with cross-functional teams, culture, and then personal development for yourself and for others. And as part of doing that, we've been doing it virtual. We expect you to continue to do it virtually, but we also gave a numeric target to do that with purpose in person a certain amount of times a quarter. And I'll tell you, when we started talking about this and when anyone would hear, it was like, Lauren, that feels RTO-y, like people, it's gonna be chaos. And when we anchored back to why we're talking about this, our shared purpose, how this lives into our employee value proposition, and the fact that flexibility doesn't mean a lack of accountability, our leaders got it and they were excited. And so we were very clear with the tools and resources and support, and we're continuing to put investment behind enabling our leaders to create those meaningful in-person connections. But it was really well received. And the last thing I'll note is we are measuring it. And so that was the other thing, is like, is this really just gonna be a badge report? And like at the end of the day, you're just tracking my badge? And the answer is no, because it's about the connection. It's not about going to the office. So our MVP first round of reporting does include office usage. but it also includes use of our flex pods. It includes community service and volunteerism. And then we're also just getting creative with data from Concur to know when people are traveling. So we're really trying to build a holistic view of both in-person and virtual connection, and using that to hold our leaders accountable, which again, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little nervous when we communicated it. But it has been really well received. People appreciate the clarity. And then we shared that with all employees who also know this is not an expectation of you, but your leader is going to be more intentional in those conversations and how we come together. So we're only about a month in, but excited to see where that goes.
Right, so back to expectation setting, clarity, even back to the goals conversation. So I found within the team working agreements, you can't start at talking about the communication norms and the communication tools. You need to actually start at the goals and the roles within the team. So making sure that there is that clarity of goals. As you said, I can see in my own metrics with the teams that we work with, we'll ask the team in a survey, do you understand the team goals? Yes. Do you agree with the team goals? Yes. What are the team goals? Very wide range of answers to that. And so often the very first step is us all really getting to agreement on what are the team goals. I'm working with a cross-functional team right now that each of the functions had their own goals, and then when we showed them to each other, there was tension in them that we're having to resolve right now, and that will only then help the work go faster, help the communication go faster. All right, now we are going into our Q&A time. So can I see the Bizaboo questions, if there are any? And while here comes Danny. And while we're doing that, if you'd like to add a commitment in, because we're going to share your commitments anonymously on the screen soon.
I have a fear of commitment. Joking. I'll go ahead and ask them if that's all right.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It looks as if the difficulties now are more about having different teams know what the others are doing, as they do not meet informally in the office. I noted the virtual matching platform. Any other ideas? Is AI a potential solution? It sounds like the question is around in between teams, cross-functionally understanding what everyone's working on.
So I know you talked about Glean as a way to learn that. Do you want to add anything to that?
I would say we're using Glean to help with that. So you could ask it something in human language, what are the marketing team's goals for this quarter? And it might not find a perfect answer, but it is pretty good at finding annual operating plans, marketing decks, any kind of information that it has access to, and then showing you links to that. And also for administrators, you can go in and verify different knowledge sources. So you have to commit resources to be able to do that, but it helps you, back to an earlier point, trust the tools and systems to be able to do that. Short of having Glean, a lot of it is just fighting those coordination headwinds. You have to develop some sort of system so other teams can have access to what other teams are working on without just having a bunch of one-on-one meetings between the teams. That's the least efficient way to cascade that information.
Maybe I would just add, and Sacha, you touched on this, just sharing goals between teams is something that we historically have not done well, and it does cause friction. But as we continue to work with leaders and really emphasize leading your direct team is important and something you do, but almost more important today is how you lead and bring together cross-functional teams. And for a company like AllState that historically has been department-focused, a bit siloed, that's something we're really having to work on as a leadership team, but it's a conversation, and sharing the goals is a great way at the leadership level to get alignment and then transition that down to teams.
You ready for another one? Oh, yeah. I'm going to rephrase this one a little bit. How do you document processes for the wider company while also being flexible and organic in the team dynamic?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Good question.
It's not mine.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We say something in the employee experience team that our job is to absorb the complexity, right? Our entire approach kind of follows this theory that it's not one size fits all. If we can sort of ship something and then you can subsequently describe in a single sentence like what our policy is, then we kind of screwed up. We designed it for HR instead of designing it for the actual work that's being done. So I would say this is trying to like kind of manage the balance between a top-down, structure-heavy set of mandates with a more grassroots, like light touch movement. One of the things that we're doing tactically, we are organized functionally, but it's an incredibly cross-functional organization. So part of it is really making the expectation known that part of your job is knowing folks on other teams and checking in with folks on other teams. For our leaders, part of the job is being in the details of the work, and we have those kind of moments where you check in to make sure everyone's aligned. We're trying to put into place kind of light touch project team norms at the beginning of sprints and kickoffs, so we can put up a little bit of scaffolding that's enough policy and enough process for a moment in time, and then not being precious when it sort of dissipates and flow and sort of recedes.
I would say there's really not a perfect solution to this. It depends. The answer is it depends. You can look at it two ways. One, try to implement it at the top. I would advise doing that by tying it to values. If you have operating principles and values, that's something that is a shared language across all teams. And if you start to find that it's not working, you start to ask questions why. Maybe that shouldn't be a top-level mandate. Then start at the team level. You can do pilots and see what works and see what becomes magnetic. If something is truly moving a team forward, is truly helping their productivity, other teams will ask for it. So if you run a pilot and it runs really well, other teams will start to notice, and then you may have this aha moment of, oh, this actually could be bigger than a team level. So it's hard to go wrong with that. Even if you just solve it at one team level, you've made a difference. But if it becomes magnetic, you may be onto something that it could be a company-wide policy to put in place.
And actually, back to those values and behaviors that you're talking about, usually the companies, especially enterprise companies, have that at that company level. But then the team working agreements, which we keep talking about, we do an exercise at the team level. What are those behaviors that we're expecting of each other? Because they might be slightly different, but tied to the values of the company, but slightly different depending on the type of work that that team itself is working on.
Okay, we're doing a live question. Our
Great.
event marketing lead here, Anna Bennett. Anna, she asked a question on the app. Well, I'm going to take the 10 steps and give her the microphone. Come on.
All your ideas of the flexible agreement really resonate with me, and I think it's a great idea just to keep it, fluid and let the team decide what they do. And that works well when you are part of the team. What happened with the onboarding of the new recruits? How do you keep that knowledge base? How do they know that you guys are running those flexible agreements? And because we all come from different backgrounds, right? So that's a question.
Anybody want to talk about onboarding?
Yeah, I would actually say that's a great forcing function to delineate what should be implemented at a kind of a federal level versus a state level or a more team unit size level. If it's something that you would want to share with everyone during onboarding, that kind of answers the question, right? And so I think it is valuable to go through this process, especially if you're making the transition to distributed work, of what does onboarding look like? What are the absolute essentials that new team members need to know about how we work? Because you can't put everything in there. And so I think that's actually a good filter of what makes the cut. What do you believe absolutely must be known by everyone that works here to operate at a baseline level? And then the rest of the stuff, maybe they can learn on the job. So you actually generated an answer. Like, if you're looking for ways to do this, start with onboarding.
And when a new person, it might not be a new person to the company, but a new person to the team, that's a great time to take a look at the team working agreement again and say, this can be a great onboarding document to the person, but also we can evolve this document based on what the new expertise, the new, what that new person is bringing into that team dynamic. All right, Danny, I think disappeared. So maybe that means we don't have any more questions, or we have another question?
I'm here, just hanging.
You're in the
Like a
dark.
shadowy figure.
Bridget Goldstein is asking about how this, and I'm paraphrasing again, sort of adapts when teams are globally distributed. What are sort of the pros and cons as teams are distributed globally?
Can you repeat the beginning? What about global teams? Did you hear it?
Let me just read you the question, okay? And is Bridget here? Is Bridget online? All right. Context helps, as they say. Are the teams that you're discussing distributed across the country or distributed around the world? If both, what are the pros and cons of each? Kind of a broad question about nationally distributed and globally distributed. But anybody want to hit that one?
Yeah, I think for us, it's we have to treat it globally because there are people all around the world. I'm interested to hear what you say when you optimize for one time zone, but I think you need to make that clear, whatever the decision is. Are we optimizing for global or synchronized to one time zone? And really, there's very little in between. I would argue that any company at enterprise scale is a distributed company, whether they want to identify as such or not. Work happens on the internet for most of these companies, and so it is worth putting in some of these first principles because even if a lot of people glom to an office, inevitably some of that work is going to happen over the internet. But maybe you have a different opinion with people generally optimizing for one time zone.
Yeah, I think the benefit of having a global workforce, right, especially with our product, is that we can be locally relevant in many, many, many places, right? And so there's that tension of how do we be we are sort of an HQ-centric company, but we're out there trying to win markets. And so maybe one example I'll use, right, is Airbnb sponsored the Olympics. We're one of the Olympic sponsors. And for the summer and the lead up to the Olympics, our chief business officer and so much of our product team and our policy team were in France. It shifted. So for that period of time, for that portion of the organization, they weren't running on Pacific time, right? They were working locally, boots on the ground. And that was the orientation. And many other functions in the company continued on Pacific time. So there's also this agility to be able to flex kind of function by function or product line by product line for a period of time. So again, I keep coming back to the dynamism of don't set it and forget it. I think that's a real trap for frustration as a practitioner. Oh, I already solved this problem. Right, but for so many of us, the way that remote work really came to be was through disruption. And so keeping in mind this idea of being incredibly adaptable to change and building a workforce and processes and mindsets that are incredibly adaptable to change, I think will help kind of leverage the benefits of globalism and being a global workforce and temper some of the headwinds that are inevitable.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So we're almost out of time. We're going to look at the word cloud. If Tasha will put that. Do we have some commitments? We do. Oh, the words. Oh, it didn't do it in statements. Okay, let's
Look at that. That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yes, work, team, connection. A lot on the connection part. They liked commit before connect. Water cooler app idea. So maybe just people want to talk to Lauren afterwards about that tool that they use. Team agreements popped up, a meeting audit. All right, so hold yourselves accountable to taking some of these actions over the next 30 and 60 days. So to wrap up, we've talked about roses, we've talked about thorns. So I just want each of the panelists to give us a bud, something that they're excited about that's coming, that's going to help our distributed teams thrive in the future. So let's start with Lauren and we'll go around.
Ooh. I'm really excited to see where so generic, but where AI takes us when we think about nudges and making it more seamless to connect both virtually and in person. I think there's so much untapped opportunity to take the manual weight off of when do we want to get together, what should we talk about, how, when, and spend more time actually collaborating and connecting or working async. So I'm just excited for how the digital tools continue to evolve. Yeah,
plus one to that. We like to say technology will never be as bad as it is today, and that's really fun. Raj also brought forward an idea earlier today that I really liked of separating the human from the human capital, which I think is a little bit of what you're getting at as well. And I'm really excited, like, we think so incrementally about improving processes, but I think we're reaching a tipping point where we get to really redesign what the experience of work is based on the tools and AI and everything that's set. And I think that's going to be an incredibly fun, hard project.
I'm excited for all of the really hard manual things that we talked about here to just get easier. I was speaking with someone yesterday, and they were breaking down that if they could get their entire team to take a variety of tests that really looked at how they processed information, and you feed this into a model that then generates a team report on how each person likes to absorb information, it creates massive tailwinds for that team. And you can do that today, but it is incredibly time-consuming and requires a huge commitment for the team to commit a lot of time to that. So technology is going to make it easier for us to get to know each other and communicate easier.
Well, thank you all so much for coming and sharing your stories with the audience, and thank you so much for your questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference.